A drunk fan stood up in the middle of a stadium packed with 40,000 people and mocked Neil Diamond right there on stage, challenging him in front of everyone. What happened next left every single person in that arena absolutely speechless. You're going to discover how one of music's greatest legends turned a potentially humiliating moment into something so powerful that people still talk about it decades later, how Neil Diamond proved that true class and talent can silence any heckler, and why this night became one of the most unforgettable concerts in rock and roll history. Stay until the end, because this story will remind you that sometimes the best response to hatred is grace, and that real artists know how to turn any situation into pure magic. Madison Square Garden, New York City, August 1976. The legendary venue was packed to capacity with 40,000 fans who had waited months for this moment. Neil Diamond was at the peak of his career, riding high on the success of hits like Sweet Caroline, Cracklin' Rosie, and Song Sung Blue. His concerts were legendary experiences, 3-hour marathons of pure energy where Neil connected with his audience in ways that few performers could match. The atmosphere that night was electric. People had traveled from all over the country to see Neil Diamond live. Some had driven for hours, others had flown in, and many had camped out overnight to get the best seats. The excitement was palpable. You could feel it vibrating through the air like a living thing. As the lights dimmed and the crowd erupted into deafening cheers, Neil Diamond walked onto that stage wearing his signature sequined shirt that caught every spotlight, his dark, curly hair perfectly styled, and that confident smile that had made him a superstar. He grabbed the microphone, and the opening notes of his first song filled the arena. For the first hour, everything was perfect. Neil moved across that stage like he owned it, his voice powerful and clear, hitting every note with the precision that had made him famous. The crowd sang along to every word, 40,000 voices united in celebration of the music they loved. But then, midway through the concert, during a quiet moment between songs when Neil was talking to the audience, something happened that nobody expected. From somewhere in the lower bowl, about 20 rows back from the stage, a voice cut through the silence. A man's voice, slurred and loud, clearly drunk. "You're a fraud, Diamond. You can't even sing without your backing tracks. You're nothing without studio magic." The entire arena went silent. 40,000 people collectively held their breath. This was before the age of social media, before viral videos, before everyone had a camera in their pocket. But every single person there would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. Neil Diamond stopped mid-sentence. He stood there at center stage, one hand holding the microphone, the other shading his eyes as he tried to see who had shouted. The spotlight operators swung their beams toward the crowd, searching for the heckler, and there he was. A man in his early 30s, wearing a wrinkled shirt, standing unsteadily on his feet, holding a beer cup that was clearly not his first of the evening. His face was red, whether from alcohol or anger or both, and he had that aggressive stance of someone who's had just enough to drink to think he's invincible. The security guards immediately started moving toward him, ready to escort him out. But Neil Diamond held up his hand, stopping them. "Wait," Neil said into the microphone, his voice calm and clear. "Let him speak. This gentleman has something to say, and I think we should all hear it." The crowd murmured in confusion and anticipation. What was Neil doing? Why wasn't he having this guy thrown out? The drunk man, emboldened by Neil's response, shouted again, "I paid good money for this ticket, and what do I get? Some washed-up singer who can't even perform without computers doing half the work. My buddy could sing better than you, and he's tone-deaf." A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the crowd, but most people were just shocked. This was Neil Diamond, a legend, being disrespected in his own concert. How would he respond? Neil walked to the edge of the stage, as close to the heckler as he could get. The spotlight followed him, and now everyone in the arena could see his face clearly. He wasn't angry, he wasn't defensive, he was smiling. Not a mocking smile, but a genuine warm smile. "What's your name, friend?" Neil asked. The drunk man seemed taken aback by the question. "What? Your name? What's your name?" "Mike. My name's Mike." "Well, Mike, I appreciate you being honest about how you feel. That takes courage, even if the beer might have helped a little with that courage." The crowd laughed, and some of the tension eased. But Neil wasn't done. "You know what, Mike? You're right about one thing. Studio magic is real. Engineers can fix pitch, they can smooth out rough edges, they can make anyone sound better than they really are. So you know what I'm going to do?" Neil turned to his band and made a cutting motion with his hand. The musicians immediately stopped what they were doing and set down their instruments. The entire band just sat there, waiting. Neil turned to the sound engineer in the booth at the back of the arena. "Cut all the backing tracks. Cut everything except this microphone. I want everyone to hear exactly what I sound like, with nothing but my voice and their ears." The sound engineer did as instructed. Suddenly, the arena was silent, except for the ambient noise of 40,000 people breathing, shifting in their seats, waiting. Neil Diamond stood alone at center stage. No band, no backing tracks, no studio magic, just him and a microphone. He looked out at Mike, then at the rest of the audience. "Mike thinks I can't sing without help. So let's find out if he's right. I'm going to sing something for all of you. No instruments, no assistants, nothing but what God gave me and what I've spent 50 years of my life developing. And after I'm done, Mike, you can tell me if I'm still a fraud." The arena was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. 40,000 people held their breath. And then Neil Diamond opened his mouth and sang. He chose "I Am, I Said," one of his most challenging songs, a piece that requires incredible vocal control, emotional depth and range. And he performed it a cappella, with nothing but his voice echoing through that massive arena. The first notes came out pure and clear, filling every corner of Madison Square Garden. His voice was rich, powerful, perfectly pitched, without any instruments to hide behind. Every nuance of his singing was exposed. Every breath, every vibrato, every emotional inflection. And it was absolutely flawless. As Neil sang, something magical happened. The audience started to understand what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a response to a heckler. This was a masterclass in vocal performance. This was a legend proving exactly why he had earned that title. People started to cry. Hardened men who had come to the concert with their buddies found tears rolling down their cheeks. Women clutched their hearts. Teenagers who had been dragged there by their parents suddenly understood what real music sounded like. Neil's voice soared through the complex melody, hitting every difficult note with precision and power. The song built to its emotional climax, and when Neil reached the line, "I am, I said, to no one there," his voice cracked with such genuine emotion that you could feel the pain and loneliness and human vulnerability that the song expressed. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. When he finished, the final note hanging in the air like a prayer, there was a moment of absolute silence, just one heartbeat of perfect quiet. And then the arena exploded. 40,000 people rose to their feet as one, screaming, crying, applauding with such force that the sound was like thunder. The ovation went on for 5 full minutes, waves of applause that wouldn't stop, people shouting Neil's name, whistling, crying out their appreciation. Neil Diamond stood there, tears streaming down his own face, overwhelmed by the response. He had performed thousands of concerts in his career, but this moment was different. This was raw, real, unfiltered connection between an artist and his audience. And Mike, the drunk heckler who had started it all? He was sitting down now, his face in his hands, crying. Not angry crying, but the kind of crying that happens when you realize you've been completely wrong about something, and you've just witnessed something so beautiful that it breaks down all your defenses. Security had reached Mike by now, ready to escort him out, but Neil Diamond saw them and once again held up his hand. "Leave him alone," Neil said into the microphone. "Mike's not going anywhere. Mike's my guest tonight." Neil pointed directly at Mike. "You challenged me to prove myself, and I did. But you know what? You did something important tonight. You reminded me and everyone here why I do this. Not for the money, not for the fame, but because music is real. It's human. It's about connection." He paused, letting his words sink in. "So thank you, Mike. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to strip everything away and show these 40,000 beautiful people what's at the heart of everything I do. Thank you for making this night unforgettable." The crowd erupted again, and this time they were applauding both Neil and, surprisingly, Mike. The drunk heckler had become part of something larger than himself, part of a moment that would become legendary. Neil wiped his eyes, smiled that brilliant smile, and turned to his band. "Okay, guys, let's give these people what they came for. Let's make some music." The band launched into Sweet Caroline, and the arena exploded with joy. But something had changed. The energy was different now, more intense, more emotional, more connected. Neil had taken a potentially disastrous moment and transformed it into something transcendent. For the next 2 hours, Neil Diamond performed with an intensity and passion that exceeded even his legendary standards. He gave everything he had, pouring his heart and soul into every song. And the audience responded in kind, singing louder, cheering harder, loving every moment. When the concert finally ended, when Neil took his final bow and left the stage, people didn't want to leave. They stayed in their seats, talking about what they had just witnessed, reliving the moment when Neil Diamond proved beyond any doubt that he was one of the greatest performers of his generation. Let me ask you a question I want you to answer in the comments. If you had been in that arena that night, would you have wanted the heckler thrown out immediately, or are you glad Neil gave him a chance to learn something? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. The story doesn't end there. The next day, newspapers across the country ran stories about what happened at Madison Square Garden. Music critics who had been in attendance wrote glowing reviews, describing it as one of the most powerful moments they had ever witnessed in their careers. One critic from the New York Times wrote, "In an age of manufactured pop stars and lip-synced performances, Neil Diamond reminded us what it means to be a real artist." His response to a heckler was not just professional, it was profound. He turned confrontation into communion, anger into art. Mike, the heckler, became something of a local celebrity for a brief period. He gave several interviews, and in each one he was deeply apologetic and genuinely moved by what had happened. "I was drunk and stupid," he said in one interview. "I said something terrible to a man who didn't deserve it. But instead of having me thrown out, instead of responding with anger, he showed me grace. He showed me what real talent looks like. He changed my life that night." Mike revealed that he had been going through a difficult divorce and had lost his job. He came to the concert angry at the world, looking for a target for his frustration. Neil Diamond just happened to be that target. But Neil's response had broken through Mike's anger and shown him something important, that grace and kindness are more powerful than revenge, that responding to negativity with positivity can transform situations in ways that aggression never can. Mike said that after that night he got his life together. He stopped drinking, found a new job, eventually remarried, and lived a happy life. And every year on the anniversary of that concert, he listened to Neil Diamond's music and remembered the night a superstar treated him with dignity when he didn't deserve it. Neil Diamond himself rarely talked about the incident in interviews, but when he did, he was always gracious. "That night taught me something important," he said in an interview years later. "It's easy to surround yourself with fans who love everything you do. But real connection happens when you're challenged, when you have to prove yourself, when you strip away all the production and effects and just be human with other humans." He continued, "Mike wasn't wrong to be skeptical. We live in an industry where a lot of what you hear is manufactured, but I've always believed that if you can't perform without all the bells and whistles, then you're not really performing. You're just presenting an illusion. That night, I wanted to show everyone, including Mike, that what I do is real. The incident at Madison Square Garden became part of Neil Diamond's legend. In the decades that followed, fans who had been there that night would tell the story to their children and grandchildren. Concert reviewers would reference it when writing about other performers. Music historians would cite it as an example of how a true professional handles adversity. But beyond the legend, beyond the stories and the reviews, something else happened that night. 40,000 people learned a lesson about grace under pressure, about responding to challenges with confidence rather than anger, about the power of talent and authenticity. The incident also changed how other performers thought about hecklers. Before that night, the standard response was to have disruptive audience members removed immediately. But after Neil Diamond showed that engaging with criticism could create powerful moments, some other artists started to take a different approach. Of course, not every artist has Neil Diamond's talent or temperament. Not everyone can respond to a challenge by performing an a cappella song flawlessly in front of 40,000 people. But the principle remained. Sometimes the best response to negativity is to prove yourself rather than simply dismiss the critic. Musicians who were at the concert that night, either as audience members or as opening acts, said it influenced their own careers. Bruce Springsteen, who was just beginning to become famous in 1976, reportedly said that seeing how Neil handled the heckler taught him important lessons about connecting with audiences. Billy Joel, another New York music legend, mentioned in an interview that he had heard about the incident, and it influenced how he thought about live performance. The power of that night, he said, was that Neil stripped away everything that separated the artist from the audience, and made it about pure human connection through music. Years later, technology would change the music industry in ways that nobody in 1976 could have imagined. Auto-tune would become standard. Backing tracks would become more sophisticated. The line between live performance and recorded performance would blur more and more. But that night at Madison Square Garden remained a touchstone. A reminder that underneath all the technology and production, music is fundamentally about human beings communicating emotion through sound. Neil Diamond continued performing for decades after that night. He toured the world, sold millions of albums, was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and received Kennedy Center honors. But many fans and critics agreed that his finest moment might have been that night when he stood alone on a stage with nothing but his voice and proved that he was everything he claimed to be. In 2018, Neil Diamond announced his retirement from touring due to his diagnosis with Parkinson's disease. The news devastated fans around the world who had hoped to see him perform one more time. But in the tributes and retrospectives that followed, the story of the heckler at Madison Square Garden was told again and again. It had become more than just an anecdote. It had become a parable about artistry, grace, and human dignity. Mike, the heckler, lived until 2015. Before he died, he gave one final interview about that night in 1976. By then, he was in his 70s. A grandfather who had lived a full life. People ask me if I regret what I did that night, he said, and the honest answer is both yes and no. Yes, because I was rude and disrespectful to a great artist, but no, because what happened after gave me and 40,000 other people something precious. It gave us a moment of pure, authentic humanity. It showed us that real talent doesn't need armor, it doesn't need protection. It just needs opportunity to express itself. He continued, I carry that lesson with me every day. When someone challenges you, when someone doubts you, the best response isn't anger, it's demonstration. Show them what you're made of. Prove yourself not with words but with action. That's what Neil did. And that's what I've tried to do in my own small way ever since. The recording of that night exists in bootleg form, passed around among collectors and devoted fans. The sound quality isn't great. It was recorded by an audience member on primitive equipment. But you can hear everything. You can hear Mike's drunken challenge, Neil's calm response, and then that incredible a cappella performance that silenced an arena. You can hear the 5 minutes of applause that followed. And if you listen carefully, you can hear people crying, their sobs captured by the microphone along with their cheers. The story of that night has taken on different meanings for different people. For aspiring musicians, it's a reminder that talent is the ultimate answer to criticism. For performers who deal with stage fright, it's an example of how confidence can carry you through the most challenging moments. For people facing challenges in any area of life, it's a lesson in responding to adversity with grace and strength rather than defensiveness. The incident also became a case study in psychology and communications courses. Professors would use it to illustrate conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, and the power of vulnerability. How do you turn an attacker into an ally? How do you diffuse hostility without surrendering? How do you show strength without aggression? Neil Diamond's response to Mike provided a perfect example. Madison Square Garden itself commemorates that night in subtle ways. In the hallway outside the main arena, among the posters and photographs of legendary performances, there's a small plaque. It reads, August 1976, Neil Diamond. The night music spoke for itself. Venue employees will tell you that musicians who perform there often ask about that night, wanting to hear the story firsthand from people who were there. For many artists, playing Madison Square Garden is a career milestone. But knowing that Neil Diamond created such an iconic moment, there adds extra weight to their own performances. The challenge becomes not just to sell out the arena, but to create their own moments of connection that might be remembered decades later. In the broader context of Neil Diamond's career, that night represented something important. He was already successful, already famous, already beloved by millions. But success can create distance between artists and audiences. Fans start to see performers as larger than life, as somehow different from regular people. What Neil did that night was collapse that distance. He showed vulnerability, he took a risk, and he succeeded not because he was superhuman, but because he was authentically, powerfully human. The music industry today is vastly different from what it was in 1976. Concerts are bigger, more technologically sophisticated, more expensive. Security is tighter. The relationship between performers and audiences is mediated through screens, social media, and layers of management and marketing. In many ways, a moment like what happened that night at Madison Square Garden couldn't happen today. Security would remove a heckler before the situation could develop. Legal concerns would prevent a performer from engaging directly with a disruptive fan. The spontaneous, risky, beautiful human moment that Neil Diamond created would be impossible in today's controlled environment. And maybe that's why the story remains so powerful. It represents something we've lost, a time when connection between artist and audience could be immediate, unmediated, real. When an artist could take a risk and trust that their talent would be enough. When 40,000 people could share a moment of genuine emotion without everyone recording it on their phones. Some critics argue that we romanticize the past, that we make these old stories into myths that never quite match reality. But the people who were there that night insist that the reality was even more powerful than the story. They say that describing what happened doesn't capture the feeling in that arena, the electricity, the emotion, the sense that everyone was part of something special. Now let me ask you another question for the comments. Have you ever had a moment where someone challenged you and you proved them wrong? Or have you ever challenged someone and been proven wrong? Share your story because I want to know your experiences. If you enjoyed this story, if it made you think about grace, talent, and human connection, share this video with your friends and family. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future stories. Thank you for watching until the end. Remember that how we respond to challenges defines us more than the challenges themselves. Real strength is showing grace under pressure. Real talent doesn't need armor. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is strip away everything else and just be authentically, vulnerably, powerfully yourself. Until next time, keep believing in the power of music, grace, and human connection.